Dr. McCarthy and Dr. Matson. We appreciate that, and we appreciate you. Next, we have Kelsey Thompson, who's our Associate Director of the Career and Professional Development Center at IUP, who is going to provide an overview of career path identification. So Kelsey, take it away.
So thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'm super excited to be here. Happy Wednesday to you all. Hope you're having a great start to your week. I know some of us that were on the call here earlier were saying it feels like we've lived a few lives here by Wednesday, but everything is good. And I'm excited to be joining you all for this inaugural event, Nuts and Bolts, Life After High School. So as Tammy shared, for the next hour or so, I'm going to be talking all about identifying a career path. But before we jump into the content that we have planned to go over today, I would like to take a moment to just introduce myself a little bit. I know I always like to know who I'm talking to or who's talking to me, and get a little bit about their background. So as Tammy shared, I am a team member here at the IUP Career and Professional Development Center. I've been at the Career Center since 2015 in varying roles. So I first started off as a graduate assistant and then was hired as the assistant director. And now most currently I serve as our office's associate director. So I did my undergraduate work at Penn State University and then came back to IUP for my master's in student affairs and higher ed, and I have never left, which wasn't too hard for me. I had a super positive experience here as a student, and I also grew up in Indiana, so this is my hometown. And one of the things I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to experience is that I've been associated with IUP in quite a few different capacities. As a community member, I grew up going to football games and baseball games with my family. As a student, a staff member, and as an alum. And one thing I can say across the board is that there are awesome people that are a part of this university who are really committed to seeing students succeed and helping them find their success however they define it. And so I feel really proud to be a part of that community. So now that we have introductions out of the way, we're going to go ahead and start the actual content for today's session, and that is all on career path identification. So whether or not you are a current student, a teacher, a community member, a family member, I hope the information that I share today will be informative and hopefully spur some productive conversations moving forward. So over the next hour or so, we'll kind of walk through that process, and I'll be sharing some insight that I've gained both professionally as well as personally, in hopes that it will resonate with you. So just to jump right in, this question, what do you want to be when you grow up, or, you know, what do you want to do with your life? It's a loaded question. I'm sure it's a phrase that many of you have been asked before, or were asked some variation of this at some point. Maybe you're being asked this as you get ready to graduate from high school and are being asked what your plans are once that happens. And so it's something you really start getting asked at a young age. And when you stop and think about it, it's kind of funny because it's truly not an easy question to answer, although we throw it out and throw it around like it is. And honestly, it might be, I think, one of the most difficult questions you can't answer for some of us. When I was younger, I can think back and I wanted to be in no particular order, a nurse, a teacher, a marine biologist, a personal trainer. Nothing was really related, but I can tell you for certain that nowhere on that list was working as the associate director of a college career center where I have spent the majority of my career. And so it's kind of funny how life works out. And I'm sure there's folks on the call or listening to this recording that can remember some of the things they wanted to be when they were younger. And I would bet that most of them are not doing that work today either. And that's completely okay. That's typically the path that most of us end up taking. So suffice it to say, it's certainly a tough question to answer. And one may argue that there's a fundamental issue with it when you phrase it this way. What do you want to be when you grow up? There is a psychologist and professor at Harvard named Adam Grant. He's written some awesome books if you are in the market for those, but he wrote an article for the New York Times where he talked about this question, and he argued that we're doing a disservice to young adults and children when we endlessly ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he lists a couple issues with it that I think are worth mentioning here this morning. And so one of the first issues that he addresses with this question that I would also tend to agree with is that it really forces children and young adults to define themselves in terms of their work. When you're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's not typically socially acceptable, or it's not typically heard someone saying, oh, a parent, a person of integrity or high moral standards. And so he goes on to share that this might be one of the reasons that a lot of parents say the most important value of their children is to care about others, but kids and young adults believe that the top value is success. And so when we define ourselves by our jobs and our careers, our worth then depends on what we achieve. Secondly, one of the other points that Grant makes is that we're implying that there is just one true calling out there for everyone. And he shares a story about, being only 15 years into his career, and talks about how it's morphed and shifted along the way. And as his own interests and priorities has shifted, his career has done the same. And so I think that just goes to show that we're all works in progress, and things can change over time. At the Career Center, we work with students pretty regularly. So I have students coming in and out of my office, and I hear them panicking about this all the time. And one of the things I try to reiterate with them is that they don't have to have everything figured out right now. Sure, you want to give it some thought and take it seriously, but it's something that takes time and consideration and an action towards bias. And we'll talk about all of that here this morning. And so all of that to say, I think it's better off replacing, what do you want to be when you grow up, to what do you want to grow into? This first question, what do you want to be when you grow up, has limited the horizon of our imagination, because it's really kind of squandered what the definition, what it means to grow. Growth is not something that we become. It's something that we are constantly becoming over time. It's a process. So when we say, who do you want to grow into, instead, I think that better encapsulates the idea that career development, career path identification, it's not a one-time thing. We're constantly growing and evolving as humans, and so it's natural for our careers to grow and evolve as well. But that doesn't mean we can't pick a place to get started, because I think a lot of us would be surprised at the opportunities and experiences that you can have along the way that can shape the trajectory of your career. So when we say, what do you want to grow into? That's really the question I think that we should be asking ourselves, and not once, rather, but regularly, kind of day in and day out. And that is really what the concept of finding a career and designing a life is all about. It's about working from where we are currently and with what we have to try and design and build a meaningful, joyful, and fulfilling life that is also aligned with our values, our beliefs, and our interests. And it's important when you are identifying a career to take it seriously, not to put undue pressure onto anyone, but when you are happy and fulfilled in your career, you get up and you love what you do each day, or at least most days, that oftentimes bleeds into your personal life as well, and vice versa. And really, when you think about it, you spend quite a bit of time at work. Research shows us that over the course of your life, you will probably spend thousands of hours at work, which might be a daunting thing to consider. But according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the average workday is about 8.7 hours long. So this means that if you would work for 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year for 35 years on average, you'll spend a total of 76,125 hours of your life at work, which is kind of crazy to think about. But hopefully that doesn't overwhelm you, and those numbers just convince you that it's pretty important to spend some time thinking about your career and what makes the most sense for you. But when you are identifying the career choice that is the right fit, you'll find yourself likely making many decisions about it. Is this the right job for me, you may ask, or am I being fulfilled and challenged with the work that I'm doing? Does this job or this career enable me to have the lifestyle that I desire? It's important to kind of consider these types of questions, and they're questions that you can continue and should be asking yourself over and over again. But it is important, all that to say, to not let the weight of choosing the right career weigh you down. On average, people change careers 5 to 7 times throughout the course of their life. And that's because life is not static, it's dynamic. And so growth is, as we've discussed, we're constantly changing. And so that statistic does make sense. But think of the person you'll be, or the person your student will be when they graduate versus the person you might be if you choose to have a family years down the road. Likely your values and priorities will shift, or maybe they'll stay the same. Or maybe over time you'll find, that at one point you want to move away and experience a new part of the country, but then you decide you'd really like to be closer to family and friends because that's what is important to you. But congruently, that might also limit some of your career options. Or maybe you find yourself in a career with limited options for growth due to factors outside of your control. So there are lots of things that play into this career shift over time, but I think the important thing to take away here is that you want to be open to opportunities and realize that changing careers is really not a bad thing. It's actually quite normal. We at the Career Center here at IUP, and I know career centers across the country, use information by a really fantastic career theorist named James Crumble. But he talks about some of this in happenstance career theory, and it's some of the one of the top career theories that we use to really frame the work that we do with students. And so at the core of this career theory, this happenstance theory, is the fact that there are unpredictable social factors, chance events, things you can't plan for, environmental factors, and important influences on someone's lives, more or less meaning we can only plan for our career so much. And so things will just happen and can really lead you to find a career path that you might not have thought of previously. I myself personally had one of these chance events when I was in college. I was a public relations major and was taking a feature writing class and was asked to interview someone on campus that had a position that we thought was interesting, that we'd like to learn more about. And so I happened to be super involved in a student-run philanthropy and thought, maybe I'll interview the staff advisor for this group that I'm engaged with. And so from that conversation, he started talking about how he went to grad school for student affairs because he was a student leader on campus. And that really kind of spurred my interest in working in higher education. I knew folks worked at a university, at a college. I had been there for 3 or 4 years, but had truly never considered that as a career path for me. But it was through this conversation that I realized, okay, maybe this is something I would like to pursue. It wasn't something I planned for, but it was one of those unpredictable life events that now has led me to have a fantastic career thus far. And on that same note, I think it's worth mentioning, and Dr. McCarthy mentioned this at the beginning as well, or at least an iteration of this statistic, that at least 80% of college students change their majors at least once. Most college students change their major at least 3 times, and 61% of college graduates would change their majors if they could go back, which I think is really interesting. But I think what that really shows us is that a lot of people don't spend as much time as they probably should identifying the right career path for them, or they don't give it as much thought and consideration as they likely would have looking back on their decision. And at this point, I always like to talk about, if I share this statistic with another group, my brother, for instance, I don't think he'd mind me poking fun at him or sharing his story. But when he was in college, he started off majoring in finance simply because I told him that I thought that would be a good career path for him. Realized was not a numbers guy, did not really like that whatsoever. So then he switched to communications, didn't really like that either. Ended up graduating in business communications and now is a college baseball coach. So didn't really end up doing anything that he went to school for, but is super happy and successful. But he definitely fell into that statistic of changing his major quite a few times. And if that's you at some point or your student at some point, just know that they are in the majority there. That is very common. So, why would graduates have changed their major? I think that's an interesting statistic to kind of look at. And so on the screen here, I pulled some information that I found. And so the reasons for deciding to go back and change their major, they vary. So you'll see that some are from pursuing their passion to looking for better or more job opportunities. I think this is one of those instances where hindsight is 20/20, and even if you do switch careers, you can take the experiences and skills you learn with you. This is something we talk to students about quite often. It's what we refer to as transferable skills. So skills that you learn in one area or one field or one experience that you can then take with you throughout the course of your career. And these are oftentimes the kinds of skills that employers look for as well. So think about things like communication, leadership, teamwork. So it's not like you can, if you decide to switch careers at some point, all of the work that you've done previously is just thrown to the wayside. You can oftentimes pull the experiences and skills that you gain and use those to make you really quite marketable moving forward. Ideally, though, and kind of the whole point of my presentation here this morning is that you do want to spend some time at first really thinking about what you would be best suited for and enjoy doing. So hopefully you don't fall into one of these categories or one of these people that would go back and change their major. An interesting question or statistic that I'll share is looking at what % of college graduates actually work in a field related to their major. I think a lot of people would be surprised that only 27% of people end up working in a field that's related to their major after they graduate. I personally fall into this 27%. If you look at my undergraduate degree, I was a public relations major, and most people in our office do as well. I know Tammy, who is the director of our career center here, was an English major. So it's very common for people to end up working in a field that's not directly related, and that's okay. But there are so many benefits to a college degree in particular. And so just to name a few of those, for starters, it definitely makes you more marketable. So probably not to anyone's surprise, there are an increasing number of jobs that require higher education. And in fact, over 80% of jobs in the fastest growing occupations, so jobs that fall within our healthcare, STEM, education, government industries, most of those require some type of college degree. And so earning a degree will greatly increase your marketability because it'll make sure that you are qualified for more positions, as well as making you a more competitive candidate. And this is a major benefit, especially when jobs are scarcer, not necessarily where we are at currently with today's job market, but at some point we might get to a point where jobs are scarcer. And so having that college degree will help set you apart from potentially another candidate. Having a college degree of some sort also helps you gain more access to job opportunities. So not only are you more marketable when you have some type of college education and a degree, but many job possibilities will open up when you have one. College graduates see 57% more job opportunities than non-graduates. And so a degree typically enables you to find opportunities that you're hoping for and have flexibility when you're choosing where to work. You'll also have higher earning potential. So those who have a higher education degree can expect greater financial benefits and higher salaries than those just with a high school education of some sort. Those with a bachelor's degree can expect to earn an average of over $60,000 per year, and those with a master's degree can expect to earn an average of more than $72,000 per year. So clearly higher education pays. That's not to say it's the only path, but it's just a path to certainly consider. You'll see on the screen there are a lot of benefits to earning a college degree. Hopefully these aren't things that are too surprising. I'm sure there are conversations and things you might have thought of already. But in addition to some of the topics and the points that I just mentioned, even if you end up working in a different career than you intended, there's a lot of benefits to the time you spent in higher education. So you gain relevant hard and soft skills. You truly grow as a person. College or any post-secondary education experience is really a time of profound change. And so the person you typically enter as is not the person you'll leave as. Over the course, of course, the college education is more than just about securing a job and a steady income. So when you consider health and safety prerequisites for leading a fulfilling life, bachelor's degree, research shows us holds bachelor's degree holders are 47% more likely to have health insurance provided through their job, and their employers contribute more to their health coverage. And life expectancy is also longer for those who attend college, which I think is an interesting fun fact. So studies suggest that those who have attended at least some college, some point in their lives can expect to live 7 years longer than their peers with no post-secondary education. So kind of a little fun fact there for you this morning. So all that to say, kind of leading into the main event here this morning, identifying a career, finding a career path is not easy. It can change throughout your life, but that's okay. We have to start somewhere. So to help you or your student on their journey to identifying a career path, I put together 5 steps that you can take. So this is something that I've put together on my own using our own model for career development that we use here at IUP when we work with students and alumni. But it also includes concepts from life design, research I've done and found online, and just kind of my own life experience. And so I think, when I go through these 5 steps here, a lot of this information is likely not earth-shattering, but when you put it together, I think it does really make sense and can provide some really tangible tips. Because while for some of you it might feel like a lifetime away, or it might be something that you're kind of pushing to the back of your head, the goal is to really help students make a successful transition from high school into higher education or post-secondary education or experience of some sort into the working world, and find that meaningful career path. So now I want to transition into some things that you can start to do to identify that career path. I want to spend a moment talking to you all about life design. Life design is a relatively new concept. I would say within the last 3 to 5 years or so, it's really become kind of a buzzword, a buzz topic in career development. And it came out of a course that was taught at Stanford University by 2 engineers. And they decided to try and solve, their whole career was based on solving problems. And so they decided to try and solve one of the largest problems that people have, and that is answering that very loaded question: what do you want to do with your life, or who do you want to grow into? And so design thinking and life design is all about solving problems. And in this case, you're solving your own problem. How should you invest your time? How will you achieve your dreams? Design thinking can help you choose between options and maximize the outcome of your time and your effort, which I think we all can agree is a great approach. One thing I particularly like about this concept and using it with students is that it encourages young adults or anyone that's using this philosophy to keep their childlike curiosity and have a bias to action. So really what that means is to ask questions, have conversations, and to get out and do stuff. So to start off, I want to address the things that they disagree with, they meaning these 2 life design principles from Stanford, which are likely thoughts or phrases that you've had or heard throughout the course of your life. They call them dysfunctional beliefs. And so the first is to follow your passion, which I'm sure you've heard. Less than 20% of people have any one singular passion in their life. So that's not typically an organizing principle for this design concept. Another dysfunctional belief that they mention is that you hear that you should know now what you want to do, and if not, your life is late. You're off to a late start. Life is really fluid. You're not late. Their whole principle is about you are here and you start here where you're at. And the last dysfunctional belief that they mention is, are you being the best possible version of you? You can't settle for anything less than the best. And that really implies that there is a singular best. And so they talk about, and I think this phrase is really interesting and cool to share this morning, the unattainable yes is the enemy of all the available betters. And so when you focus on that unattainable yes, you kind of push aside all these other opportunities that could be just as fulfilling. So one of the very first things you have to do when you're identifying your career path is to really understand yourself. And so that's step 1. There are a lot of things you'll want to consider when you're identifying a career path, and you can't do that until you know yourself and establish a baseline awareness, because this will help inform your decisions moving forward. So one of the very first places to start is with your strengths and weaknesses, and thinking about not only what you enjoy doing, but it's just as helpful to think about what you don't enjoy doing. So for example, do you like working alone or with others? Do you prefer a schedule or a routine to your day, or do you like going into work or going into a day where things are constantly changing? Do you want to work remote, or would you prefer to go into an office? I think that's a question a lot of people are asking themselves after working remote for the last several years. Do you want to work on a computer most days, or do you prefer to be more people focused? These are all things to ask yourself, so you can really start to figure out what it is you enjoy doing and what it is you don't really prefer. You might also ask yourself, what motivates you? What makes you excited to get up and leave your bed? What makes you hate your job? Hopefully you like more of your job than you hate, but what are the things that you don't find bring you joy? What are the things that make you want to leave your office as soon as possible? What do you do in your spare time? How do you feel about that? What does your ideal life look for you? This first step, trying to, when you're considering a career path and doing some self-reflection, it's really all about empathizing. So you're learning to understand yourself by answering these questions. It can be helpful to even write down your answers or take some notes on a computer or laptop. At this point, you can sometimes stop at this step, do some research, and try to really understand what it is you want out of a career. But these are all things to start considering. Once you decide, okay, I feel like I have a pretty solid baseline awareness of what it is I like, what I want, you can start then to think about things like where you want to live, salary requirements, and the type of working environment that you would prefer. Glassdoor is a great website for looking at the average salary for your field. And while money is not everything, I do think it's important to know what you can expect in terms of earning potential throughout the course of your career. Also, if you have location requirements or you want to be someplace specifically geographically, that will also change the name of the game for you. So, for example, I shared that I was a public relations major when I was at Penn State, and a lot of those types of jobs, or a lot of the jobs that my classmates were pursuing, were in, big cities, New York City, Chicago, San Francisco. But I really wanted to be close to family, and my family's here in Indiana, PA. And so for me, I really limited myself career-wise when I thought I wanted to go into public relations, but that was a sacrifice I was willing to make because I wanted to be close to family. For others, that might not be as much of a priority, but that's something to think about. And then all of this translates really nicely into thinking about your values. So values should determine your priorities, and deep down, they're probably the things that you use to measure, to tell if your life is turning out the way you want it to. When the things that you do and the way you behave matches your values, life is usually pretty good. You feel satisfied and you feel content. But when these don't align with your personal values, that's when things start to feel kind of wrong. And that can lead to be a real source of unhappiness. And so that's why making a conscious effort to identify your values is really important. So values in terms of a career path might look different for everyone. This could include things such as money, prestige, work-life cohesion, status, power, making a difference. These are all things that can be a part of your values. You'll also want to start thinking as best as you can about connecting the dots between who you are, what you believe, and what you do. In life design, they talk about your work view and your life view. So your work view is what work is and why you do it. And then your life view is what gives your life meaning and value. And so I really like how they mesh the two. And so they discuss if you can blend your work view and your life view together, that's when you really start to lead your life as meaningful. Another concept of life design that I think is worth mentioning, this step in our career path identification, is something called gravity problems. So these are not real problems, meaning they're not actionable. So if it's not actionable, it's not actually a problem. It's a circumstance, a situation, or a fact of life. You cannot solve a problem that you're not willing to have. So for example, let's say at some point in your career, if you work at a company that is family owned, and the only way to become a CEO is you have to be a part of that family and have that name, that's not a problem, that's a circumstance. And so at that point, it's helpful to then accept, okay, this is a circumstance, how can we reframe it? Or do we need to do something else? And so thinking about what those gravity problems might look like for you when you're identifying a career path. So all that to say, kind of lastly, working down this slide here, the last thing to consider is education that is needed and if jobs are available. Similar to salary, I think it's really helpful to know if your career that you want to pursue is experiencing growth or decline. And while that might not necessarily be a reason to not pursue something, it's again helpful to know kind of what you're walking into. Ultimately, you just really want to spend some time at this point reflecting and giving thought as to why you want whatever it is as a career. That answer might be really simple for some, and for others, it might take some time. So wherever you fall in that spectrum, you are exactly where you need to be. I want to spend a minute here talking about this awareness activity. This is something that we use quite frequently with our office and our team and our students that we work with at IUP. But I think it bears merit to share now because it falls really nicely within the step of understanding yourself. And so when we meet with students or alumni who are kind of at this point where they're trying to decide what their ideal career path looks like, we talk to them about all of the different factors that they have to consider when they're making this choice. And so ideally, they would find something that they love to do, what the world needs them to do, what the world will pay them to do, and what you do well. And so that kind of falls right in the middle here of this Venn diagram. But that's not always the case. That's not always that easy. And so this really spurs some great conversation. So feel free to use this activity with your students or yourself to kind of figure out what it is you want to do. And we also have a really cool resource here at IUP, and a lot of other career centers, colleges, and universities have something similar, and you can likely find information that's relevant to this on the internet as well. But something we'll use with students is a resource called What Can I Do With This Major, where they're able to go in and select on this platform all different types of majors and then see the different paths that they can pursue with that degree. So, you know, as an English major, it lists the different areas that students could work in with that degree. So it talks about writing and editing, technical communication, publishing. It then lists what those job titles look like, who are the employers that hire those folks, and then it provides some strategies that students can take in order to put themselves in a really great position to land that type of job after they graduate. So again, lots of similar resources available online, but I just wanted to share a little bit about what some of the resources we use are. But that's all under that get to know yourself. That's a really important first step, and it really kind of frames the rest of the tasks you need to do in identifying a career path. And so then step 2 is really focused on prioritizing your deal makers and ruling out your deal breakers, which I like to call your career non-negotiables. And so you might not know exactly what these look like at this point in your life or your career, and they can certainly change over time, but I want to spend a moment here discussing what some of these might be. This is similar in a lot of respects to the work you'll do in establishing that base level awareness or getting to know yourself or helping your student get to know themselves. And the more specific you can be in identifying what you want and what you're looking for, the better off you'll be. So in terms of deal makers and deal breakers, I went ahead and listed as many as I could. There's likely quite a few that I missed, but some deal makers and deal breakers for, you know, rising seniors, current college students, someone looking to make a career shift might be the salary, benefits, what's the office culture like? Are the working hours flexible? Is there opportunities for remote work? Are you looking for a team that's more team oriented, or do you prefer independent work? And I think the really neat thing about this is that what might be your deal maker might be someone else's deal breaker. And so we're all unique and we all have different preferences here. For me in particular, when I started off in public relations at Penn State, I realized along the lines, I liked the work that I was doing, but I really wanted a career where I felt like I made a difference. And I got up every day and I enjoyed the impact that I was having on the people that I was communicating with. And I didn't think I'd find that in public relations. So luckily, I feel like I have found that now working in higher education and with college students. And luckily, I've been able to take a lot of components of the work that I did in PR and intertwine that into my current position. But that for me was a deal maker. Like that, I wanted a career where I could make a difference, but that might not be as important to other people. So you really need to, again, spend some time thinking about what it is for you that are your deal makers and then your deal breakers. But moving into step 3, so we've talked about getting to know yourself, establishing that baseline awareness, prioritizing your deal makers, and rolling out what your deal breakers are. The next step is really then getting to explore different careers and industries. And this is really, I think, where the fun begins. Once you have done that work, done that self-reflection, and established, the things that you're really looking for and the things you're not willing to kind of lean one way or the other on, then you can start to explore different careers and industries that would be a good fit. Careers are constantly changing and evolving. You might laugh at it, but like only 5 to 7 years ago, no one even knew what a social media influencer was. And now we have people that are in this career and they're making 6 figures and it's quite lucrative. So careers are constantly changing, just like we're constantly changing. So there are lots of ways to explore and find careers. I think a lot of it can happen pretty naturally just through conversations, asking the people in your circle, parents, family members, friends, teachers, family members of your friends, what it is they do for a living, how they chose that career, maybe listen to kind of their career path. It's really interesting to see how people ended up where they are. So those conversations can be really insightful, but, we can watch TV shows and movies and maybe we see a character or a career depicted on screen that we think, oh, okay, yeah, I definitely want to look into that a little bit further. Or maybe you really enjoy a certain subject that you studied in school and that lends itself to certain career paths. When all else fails, there are some great tools online that you can use to help and assist in this process. One free resource that I would highly recommend is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They have an occupational outlook handbook where you can go in and search for any career that you can really think of. You're able to type in keywords and it'll then populate different web pages that they've created that talk about different career paths. They'll go into a lot of detail, so they'll discuss education and certification requirements. What's the job outlook? Is this a career that's growing or declining? They talk about average salary data. They'll list skills that typically people in this field have or need to have to be successful. And one of the cool features on this webpage in particular, or this platform in particular, is that let's say, for example, you select a nurse, and so you read about nursing and what that entails. It lists a similar occupations tab, so then you're able to see the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They pull other careers that either have similar education requirements, skills, something that's similar. So then you can continue to explore other careers that kind of fall under that same umbrella. Not listed on the screen here, another platform though that I think is really helpful and is also free is ONET. ONET has a fantastic interest inventory called the ONET Interest Profiler. It asks you 60 questions, and then based off of those questions, you're then able to look at different careers that would be a good match. Interest inventories are really helpful tools, I think, to spur the conversation or kind of expand your mind as to what's possible. Those interest inventories, while they're super helpful, doesn't mean you have to necessarily listen to what the results are. You know, if it tells you that you should be an elementary school teacher, but that's the last thing you want to do, you don't have to listen to it. But I do think interest inventory such as that can be a really helpful tool to spur some really good conversation and do some exploring. But also on ONET, it's similar to the Occupational Outlook Handbook, where you can search for different careers, and it gives you a lot of that same information in terms of education requirements, salary data, you know, is this a job that's growing, declining? It'll give you similar occupations as well. It talks about what the day-to-day looks like. So what are the type of tasks you'd be required to do? So really helpful information. But aside from that, I don't think you can push aside just having those conversations like we mentioned about, and a more intentional type of conversation that you can do is something we call an informational interview. And so this is where you reach out to someone in a field or industry that you desire to learn more about, or maybe they work for a company or organization that you have an interest in learning more about, and you have a conversation with them and ask them, you know, how you got to where they are, or how they got to where they are today. They can talk a little bit about their background and education and experiences that they've had, and share some advice for a current student who's looking to pursue that themselves. Those informational interviews are a great career exploration tool to help you identify a career path, and past that, they're a great networking tool as well. So it allows you to start building your professional network of people in your field that you can then pull from at some point throughout your career. But lots of ways to explore. And so at that point, the next step is to then get out and do things. And so this is where you really start to take all of that time and energy that you've spent exploring and preparing and doing some self-reflection and put it to good use. We learn the best by doing and experiencing. And so when we're talking about life design, which I've mentioned a few times here this morning, they refer to this as prototyping. And so the authors of the life design book, Dave Burnett and Bill Evans, explain when we prototype to ask good questions, create experience, reveal our assumptions, fail fast, fail forward, sneak up on the future, and build empathy for ourselves and others. Once you accept that this is really the only way to get the data you need, prototyping becomes an integral part of your life design process. So really what they're saying is the only way to figure out what it is you want to do is to get out and do things and have experiences. So when I was in high school, before I ended up at Penn State and thought I was going to major in public relations, I was looking at colleges and decided I really wanted to be a nurse. Even then, I think I had that inkling that I wanted a career where I helped people. And so that felt like the most logical step for me. I wasn't particularly great at science. I didn't really love science, but I was really, you couldn't have told me otherwise. I think my parents knew better, which most of the time that they've been right. So they, I jumped right in though without any prior validation. I just decided, okay, nursing is going to be the move for me. So in other words, I didn't prototype or get out and do things. I didn't talk to people, and it showed. Eventually though, as I said, my parents, I think, knew otherwise. And so I decided to shadow a couple nurses at our local hospital and realized at the end of those shifts, I was much more excited about wearing the scrubs because I felt like I was in an episode of Grey's Anatomy. But the nursing part, I did not like whatsoever. And so I would not have known that though, had I not gone out and had that type of experience. I hadn't gone out, had those conversations, been in that environment. Before that, you couldn't have convinced me otherwise. And I was ready to base all of my post-high school experiences off of nursing programs. But there are a lot of other ways to prototype and get out there and do things other than job shadowing, volunteering in the community, attending different events, whether it be a career fair, a networking event, events that are happening within your community. If you have a part-time job, that can be a great way to get out and do things. Continuing to talk to people in your field and doing that research online. I think doing that together is a really great tool. And getting some type of work experience maybe in your field. We call that an internship. And in higher education, but getting out and working in the field you hope to enter, even if it doesn't look exactly like the career path you'll pursue after high school or college, I think can be really impactful. So getting out and doing things is key. And so finally, then making it to step 5, the next piece is to make a decision and commit to it. But know you can always revisit this if you need to, because as we talked about earlier, we're always growing and evolving. Once you establish your career and find a major or a path, allow yourself to pursue that and really go all in. I don't know when it became kind of uncool to not be passionate and excited on all things, but I'm kind of throwing that out the door. Really learn the material you're studying in your classes, or really soak in the experiences that you're having. Take the time to digest that information, ask questions, and treat this as though you're preparing for the rest of your life. Don't just turn in an assignment or have an experience just so you can cross it off the list and move on. Talk to others in your field, job shadow, get a part-time job, really invest your time and energy into preparing for your future. And I can guarantee this is something you won't regret. Before we wrap up here, I did want to mention a little bit about some of the competencies employers want. I think it's important with all of this information that's related to career path and identification to keep in mind what hiring managers are looking for. You might wonder, though, why is it important to know this or for your student to know this? And I think for a couple of reasons. I mean, these are the skills that data has shown us that employers are looking for when they're making hiring decisions. And these are the things that will set a good candidate apart from a great candidate. And so I always say when someone's trying to narrow down a candidate pool or trying to make a decision here, if they have 2 candidates with equal education and experience, the candidate who can show that they are professional and display leadership qualities and think critically, more times than not, that is the candidate who is going to move forward. And so a lot of times these are the skills that we talk about. They're referred to as soft skills, or sometimes now we hear power skills. But basically when you're looking at hard skills versus soft skills, you'll hear those terms kind of thrown out frequently. Hard skills are going to be the more technical skills related to the job. They're the things that can be tested, whereas soft skills are things that you can't test, but it's more so how you relate to and work with others. These are the things that are oftentimes much harder to teach, but they're in value to your professional success. So when we're going out and we're prototyping and we're thinking about the different careers that we want to pursue, kind of keeping in mind similarly what it is employers are looking for, and identifying the skills that you have or the skills that you need to work on so you can make yourself very marketable. I took a look the other day when I was putting this presentation together, and this is data that's constantly changing, but the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, so where that Occupational Outlook Handbook is located, they also have some really great data that you're able to take a look at. And so these are the fastest growing occupations that they have identified, and this was taken or this was collected in September of 2021, so it is pretty recent. So this goes back to when we are doing some of that career path identification and looking at what will be a good fit. Also taking a look at, are the careers that we're pursuing on the rise? Are we seeing less demand for them? Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should or should not pursue something, but I do think it's helpful to look and see what the growth or decline is in certain industries. So this is some information that they've collected to look at what the fastest growing occupations are, as well as the fastest growing industries. And so again, I won't read these off the screen to you, but if you are interested, if you go to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, you are able to pull this data at any point. So to wrap up, I just want to talk about a career success formula. I have to give credit to Tammy, Dr. Tammy Manko in our office. This is something that she's used in presentations, and I've adapted because I think it's a really great way to kind of wrap up what we're talking about here this morning with career path identification. So really when it comes down to finding a successful career, there are a few things you need to have. First and foremost is some passion for what you're doing, have an aptitude for the work you're pursuing, be determined, have a strong work ethic, continue to network in your field. Always look for professional development opportunities and ways to continue to learn and grow. And then have some type of boldness, be appropriately bold and not afraid to ask for things and be curious and ask questions. And ultimately, when you combine all of these things together, that's what we find for students and alum that we've worked with, what we've seen allows them to have that successful and fulfilling career that we hope everyone is able to achieve. So thank you so much. I hope this information was helpful and relevant, and it definitely spurs some good conversations moving forward. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, I really appreciate your time this morning.